It looked like just another parent-teacher meeting in school. Parents walked in and out of classrooms, listening to nice words from teachers about the wonderful work their offspring were doing. And then I happened to notice in one classroom, a tree had been constructed in the middle of the room, and little luggage tags were hanging off the tree. Parents were walking up to the tree, turning a few of the luggage tags and reading them. I saw fathers and mothers turn to each other, go, tut, 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 and walk away swiftly. And the more times I saw this, the more curious I became. What was written on those tags? Come midday, the parents had all gone home. I went back to that room. The room was empty. The tree stood alone in the middle of the room. And I approached, and around the base of the pot, it said, "Our wish tree." And I started to read the tags. They'd been written by children of the most educated people in this country, by and large. And they said things like, "I wish Mummy and Daddy didn't go to so many parties. I wish Mummy and Daddy wanted to be at home more often. I wish Daddy didn't just come home from office and shout. I wish Mummy had time to put her mobile phone down and see me." These were all true. And now I could understand perfectly why the children's parents did not want to receive these messages. When we decide to bring children into the world, does that fall into the category of our citizens' rights or our citizens' duties? There's been a fair amount of talk already this morning about rights and duties. There was also talk just now about microcosms acting as models for the bigger picture. I can't think of a better microcosm, a better starting place than our homes. On another occasion, sitting in my office, suddenly somebody burst in, on this occasion not somebody who was going to be receiving a bad response for bursting in, and called me urgently to the school medical room, where an 8-year-old child was lying on a bed, having been beaten badly by another child. After staying with the child until the parents came and took the child to hospital for a checkup, a teacher came and said, "We've got the boy who did it. He's in another room." So we went and sat with him, another 8-year-old child. And gently I asked him, "Why did you do this?" He said, "My father told me, if they hit you, hit them back until they don't get up again." I couldn't help thinking as I sat there, I would wish to say to that father, can you call yourself my fellow citizen in any kind of society that I want to be part of? If you are a parent who organizes a birthday party for 9-year-olds by taking the children to a 14-rated movie, so that my child thinks I'm a heel because I won't let him go, you're not my fellow citizen. If my child comes home with glazed eyes and doesn't sleep at night because he's been playing extremely violent, ugly computer games in your home with your child, I don't think you have the right to call yourself my fellow citizen. I'm an educator, and therefore sometimes if I challenge fellow parents, they get a bit sensitive. So sometimes I ask my spouse to do it. And every time she gets the answer, oh, we didn't know. Oh, how are you supposed to know these things? Oh, you know, it doesn't really matter because the children they're exposed to so much stuff anyway. So what does it matter? And how are we to know? How are we to know? I want to know the rating of a film. I can know it in 30 seconds on my phone. But parents, you couldn't even be bothered to spend 30 seconds on your phone to know whether you were doing something wrong, not only with your own child, but with mine as well. You want to talk about your citizenship? You want to talk about your rights? One parent even said, oh, do they have ratings? Or, oh, the people who make those ratings, what nonsense is that anyway? Those people happen to have more knowledge about child psychology and things than I do. And I think that's one of my major points, because I am talking about the educated in the population. But what really concerns me is that they throw their hands up with a, we're no worse than anyone else, and, oh, what can you do? And it's not really possible, and what power do we have? People talk a lot about the values being degenerated from the West. I come from Britain. When I'm in Britain, I'm thankful that if I leave my son in a room with a TV at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I can be sure he will see no nudity, he will hear no foul language, he will not see extreme and overt violence. And why? Very quickly. Because back in the 1970s, a lady by the name of Mary Whitehouse mobilized parents. Parents took to the streets. Parents campaigned in Trafalgar Square. They campaigned outside Parliament. And they said, we care about what our children are exposed to, and we believe you have a duty to respect our wishes, and we want our children to be able to grow up in a healthy environment. It was called the National Viewers and Listeners Association, and as a result of their work, legislation was passed in the country that still applies today that created something called the watershed, a 9 p.m. at night watershed. And there is a fundamental difference in what can be shown, what can be public, what can be broadcast, both before and after the watershed. A simple case of people power, because a group of citizens came together and said, we have a right to express our views and our wishes and to have them respected so that we can bring our children up in a healthy environment. I studied law many, many, many years ago. And in British law, which incidentally, of course, doesn't have the benefit of a written constitution, and I think we're often very envious of you for the fact that you do. But in the law of tort, I remember spending hours and hours and hours studying a very famous case called Rylands and Fletcher, and having endless discussions about how, if I own a guard dog, and the guard dog bites someone who breaks into my premises, do I have a legal responsibility? The case concerned as well having reservoirs or bodies of water on your land, and what is your responsibility if the water escapes from your land and does damage to someone else's, or knocks their home down, or kills a member of their family, or something like that. But as time's gone on, I've found myself thinking it's kind of ironic to be so worried about people's responsibility and their duties when their dog goes crazy, or when water escapes from their premises, And yet we fail to hold them accountable when their children behave in ways which are inappropriate in the society. I live in Gurgaon, and I think any of us in Gurgaon, especially those who work in education, well, I was going to say can never forget, but I rather fear that many of my peers have forgotten. I would better say should never forget. I think it was 2006, if I'm not mistaken, when a boy involved in an angry confrontation with another boy took a gun to school and shot his classmate. The boy was 14 years of age. Everyone was in shock. A lot of the reactions were, that kind of thing happens in America. Doesn't happen here. And because it hasn't happened again, educators and parents smugly wash their hands and say, nothing to worry about. But if your child runs riot in a restaurant and spoils my dining experience, are you my fellow citizen? If your child bullies mine at school, are you my fellow citizen? If your child engages in stealing, cheating, and lying, are you my fellow citizen? If your child, while spouting platitudes in environment lessons, litters and abuses the environment, are you my fellow citizen? And perhaps in the most extreme, if your child is the next Eve teaser, misogynist, Harry Anvi rapist, are you my fellow citizen? My mystification is about supposedly educated people who would not dream of going into a new project in their work without making themselves informed and knowledgeable. Our friend who was here earlier talking about the T-shirts, the Nirvana T-shirts, I couldn't help noticing when she said, if it's my job, then I have to get my hands dirty. And what I want to say is, if parenting is our job, why won't we get our hands dirty? And why won't we invest the time to access information and material? But instead, too many are putting selfish short-term interests and their rights ahead of their duties. Because, unfortunately, too many are treating their parenting rather like they treat their driving, survival of the fittest, survival of he who grabs the most for himself right now, today, and that includes the 6 inches in front of your car that I can just see the chance of getting the wing of mine into. And it also includes encouraging and inciting children as well to go for everything they can get and damn the other man. That is not the way to build a society. That is not citizenship. And that is not, I believe, a responsible way for mature, educated people to behave in a democracy. And we need to get to work on this. Thank you. Now, clearly he was seeking to make a point, but what he was actually trying to say was that it may be that everybody else who has anything to do with the child has abdicated their responsibility for moral learning and moral guidance. But even as an educator, I'm going to say, please, please, I desperately don't want you to leave it to educators, because that's actually very dangerous. Because apart from anything else, educators have a fundamental problem, and that is that they tend to have a bad habit of thinking that if something is to be learned, then it must be taught. And that's why you get all this, I won't use one of Jerry's favorite words, I'll use a nice word, all this rot about life skills courses and values curriculum, as though somehow you can take all of the values and all of the morality that has been distilled through humanity up to today and put it in a neat little book and just tell the children, go mug it up, we'll have an exam. Even recently, CBSE have said they're going to put life skills questions into the examinations. I thought, wow, that'll do it. That's it cracked. We've got it cracked, that we don't need to worry anymore. It's all solved. So unfortunately, the educators are not the best people to put this in the hands of, because they're not necessarily thinking in the right way always.
Thank you, Mark. Let's have a question from Sneha.
My observation is, I'm a mother to 3 kids, and we encourage our children to perform well, primarily because I have seen most of my friends and people that I know, it's like a society that my child has scored 90%, 95%, and we are pressurizing the children so much more because it's our status which is at stake in the society. Now, I have 3 kids. My son is 13, and I spoke yesterday, and he's a kid with special needs. So, like, I have seen some people, and I'm also a trustee at SATU. We work with children with special needs, and I've seen people are hiding their kids if they don't perform well. They are not brought out in the society because we are ashamed of them. So, my take on this is, we are all born with certain set of skills and IQ pattern, and we have to be proud of what we are born with. And as parents, it's our duty to identify the skills and not push the child in different directions. Like my daughter, she taught in drama, and I very proudly told everybody, oh, she has scored the highest in drama, and she's getting an award for that. And they're like, oh, drama, oh, okay. It's like, she's not.
There are those subjects that don't count. I remember my mother was heartbroken because I came top in RE, religious education. She said, why can't you top in a real subject?
Yeah. You know, I mean, and he understands that I'm telling that he's very smart, and he, obviously, in his body language, he has the confidence to do his immigration himself when we are traveling. Yeah. Because I have told him that you can do it. So, you know, the thing is, we shouldn't be thinking what the friends are going to say. If your child is not performing well despite trying, please bring him up and say, yes, we tried. So what if we got to this?
I think there's a whole lot of debates you can even get into about what defines doing well, what defines achieving. You know, the fact that the child was able to score 98% on a mugged up memory test is a test for little in the way of anything that will be of value to that child in their lifetime. So, you know, what do we mean by actually even achieving or being good? And these are exactly, I think, the kind of issues on which parents have got to start raising their voices. You know, we've had a long period where, for example, parents have actually, I think, played a part in, you know, especially amongst the more educated, in moves towards more holistic approaches to education. But what tends to happen is that there's an acceptance of those holistic, more sensitive, caring approaches in primary education. But somehow when the children cross the Rubicon into middle school, from class 5 to class 6, suddenly we're all supposed to get serious. And that means we're all supposed to go back to doing things exactly the way they were done 30, 40, 50 years ago, all sit in rows, all face the front, all write for hours, scribbling away, and all mug up for the tests, to the point where, you know, eventually your average class 12 student today says, hey, look, I've worked out the way the game's played, and I'll play it. And that's what we have.
You know, this reminds me of John Lennon. He was asked in school, this is what he said years later. He said, they asked me in school, what do you want to be when you grow up? He said, my answer was, I want to be happy. Yeah. And they told him, I don't think you understood the question. He said, no, I've understood the question. I don't think you understood the answer. I want to be happy. Right? But happiness today is measured by fame, success, and money, not by the real things of what you want to do. Yes, Darpan? Microphone for Darpan, please.
Hi, Darpan I have a question because my uncle's son studied in the same school, Shriram, but the question I have is, I think there are these two clusters of school, and because I interact with children, and I think this is one thing which I always feel, that this one cluster, which could be inclusive of Sri Ram kind of schools, that the kind of possible research, or the possible people who exist there. And in the second cluster, that is the kind of cluster where the private schools and even maybe some public schools don't have that kind of facility. I think there should be some sort of mechanism where you can pass on some of these knowledge which you actually can pass on to these guys, and there should be some sort of a forum, because I think the kind of bridge.
You're kidding. Educators are absolutely phobic about sharing their knowledge and their expertise, especially in the private sector.
No, that is something I don't know. I think this is one thing which I feel very miserable sometimes, that this gap, because what he's learning there, and the gap is very wide. It's like, I think it's 5-6 years, So I think because you know so much, you can impart that information, education to the teachers, to the faculty members, to the principals. And the second, I think not only as parents, I get very appalled. I'm not a father yet, but I get very appalled when I see that parents take their very young ones to McDonald's and the Pepsi, and then make them drink something which they should not. And I kind of get very jittery, and I just get, so my friends, don't tell him, because he is not your son or she is not your son, right? You should not tell a parent. As an individual, I also feel that I have a responsibility to tell them that what are you doing. So I think that's again, it's not the parents only, even people like us who feel what they're doing incorrectly. We should also go, and so that should combine even people who are not parents, but they have a sensibility that these are something which they should and they should not. And I get into fight with parents that this is not the way. And babies get feed onto the Pepsi and the burgers, like 1 year old, 2 years old. And I get appalled because McD has got the high stool, so where the kid can sit and actually consume all the junk possible. So, anyway, I think the question for the first one was more of a question, the second was an observation.
I'd been visiting the campus on various occasions, but in all other respects, I was working somewhere else. And over the weekend, some of the classroom furniture had arrived and been put in the classrooms, which was being organized by somebody else. And when I got there and walked into one of the classrooms, I looked, and in one corner was a little wooden kind of a cutout of a bank. And there's like 2 little doors, and the children, it was for the little ones, and they could go through the doors and they could go inside, and there was a little teller's counter, and there was some little stools in there. They could sit in there and they could role play. And in the other corner was a similar one with Ronald McDonald's face shining out from the front. And I said, get that out of here within the next 2 hours. I do not want a single parent to see it here, because you will make a hypocrite of me with every child and every parent every time I talk against junk food, if that is sitting here. And they said, oh, but we thought the children would like it. I said, get it out. I don't want it. To go back to your first question about the 2 types of schools, I disagree slightly. I think you're right that there are 2 types, but I would define the 2 types slightly differently. What we've actually got is the types that do old traditional education very badly, and the types that do old traditional education better. It's partly why I've moved, and why I've joined a new venture, a Swedish company, that focuses on personalized education, starting with every child where they are at the point where they are at that moment. Even in the best of schools, all over Delhi today, all over NCR, all over India, there are children walking into classrooms. If you're lucky, there are 20 walking into the room. There may be 40, there may be even 50 walking into the room. And during the time they're in that room, they will be treated as a homogeneous mass who are all at the same learning point at the same moment, even though we all know that's not true. Because one teacher will seek to deliver one set of knowledge to all of them, the 20, 30, 40, at the same time, in the same way, even though we know that's not what they need. People worry about the state of teachers in the country. People often ask me about, can you find quality teachers? I said, I can find a lot of people who have the potential to be quality teachers, but are ground down and demoralized by the fact that they're working in that situation, by the fact that their heart tells them at the end of every 40-minute lesson, I may have only met the needs of half the children in front of me during those 40 minutes. And yet I'm now going to walk to another classroom and do the same thing and do it over in the same way. This isn't working, and yet we perpetuate it. And again, you know, these are the kinds of things that I think parents need to make themselves far more informed. I was a little surprised a few months ago. Dr. Howard Gardner from Harvard University, from the Harvard School of Education, was here in India. And he traveled around India. When he was in Delhi and NCR, he was here for 4 days. I'll confess, I begged, stole, and borrowed tickets to make sure I got to interact with Dr. Gardner on all 4 days. But I marvel when I hear of teachers who sit down in workshops, and after 10 minutes, they send their principal a message, "Why am I here? I've done multiple intelligences before." As though somehow it was just a simple little body of knowledge that they had to absorb once and that was it. But the reality is they haven't learned it, because if they had, something would have changed in their classrooms and in the way they behave and interact with children. Because Gardner's material is all about the fact of acknowledging that children come from different places at different times in different ways. And, you know, for the lady who was talking about her autistic child, you know, I have a nephew who has Asperger's. And I tell you, on some of the intelligences, when you look at the Howard Gardner scales, he is just off the scale so far ahead of me that I'm in adoration of him. Yes, there may be intelligences on which he lacks, but you know, we've got to acknowledge each human being where they are and where they're starting from.
Yes, one last question from Aditya, and just keep it brief, Aditya, and you can also ask a question together so that we can close after that and break for lunch.
So I have more of an observation to make, so I'll quickly make it. I feel that as parents, everyone has to act more responsible themselves, because I completely agree with you, Mark, that values cannot be taught to children. Children observe their parents' behavior. So if you're a parent and you litter, you get drunk at parties and you come home squashed, you abuse in front of your children. So you do not lose the right to tell your children what's correct and what's incorrect. I think you have to check your own behavior and become more responsible and a conscious citizen when you become a parent. I think that's everyone has to keep in mind.
Just one last quick thought in relation to that. In discussions and debates on morality, in philosophical debates, there is a question that is sometimes posed to people, and it's about, do you do the right thing when nobody's watching? And I guess, just to conclude on this discussion about parenting, I would give a variation on the question. Do you do the right thing when the only person watching is your child? And that includes all of the things you talked about, the littering, the going through the red light on the traffic lights. You know? I had some children in my class one day, they laughed. Sorry, they were in my car one day. I was taking them to a party. And we come up to a crossroads. There isn't another car in sight. There isn't another vehicle in sight. And the light is red, and I stopped. And one of the kids in the back went, "Why have you stopped? Uncle, why have you stopped? Nobody's there." I said, "The light's red." "Yeah, but why have you stopped?"
Thank you, Mark. One last
Thank you.
question from Aditya.
Hi.
I work a little bit with kids. We organize quiz shows for a lot of people. So I'm sure you've been asked this question before, but you're now working with a Swedish school, right? A program which deals with individual children. My children go to a school called Irambika. It's very few kids. Again, they're like 14 or 17
Yeah.
children in one room. And there the student-teacher ratio is roughly 1:6 all the way up. And but that ends up being a very, very small amount of parents who actually ascribe to that method of education. I'm not going to call it teaching because it goes against the basic principle. But when there are so many kids outside who, just the sheer pressure of numbers that have to be accommodated
This organization, this Swedish organization, was founded by someone from the PR industry in Sweden by the name of Page Emilsson. He was over here in India about 3 weeks ago. He was a panelist on the World Economic Forum summit that was taking place at the Lila Kempinski on the session that was talking about education for all. And whilst our starting point in terms of what we're doing right now is a flagship school, he said, I'm not interested in educating the 5%, I'm interested in educating the 95%. And that was part of the discussion that he and I had. And so this question about how you reach far more students with these kind of innovative methods is very much something which is continually on my mind in terms of what we're working on. We're already, even before we opened the first school in April, we're already working on how we come up with alternative models where we can take it to second-line towns and cities at lower price points and all that sort of thing. I think one of the answers is, and you touched on it, you talked about this issue of the number of students to the number of teachers. And the thing is that, I mean, to a lot of people, that whole thing about teacher-student ratio has become one of the big sort of touchstones for measuring whether a school is good or not good. But actually, that all comes from a paradigm of control. Because it's actually about saying, how many children realistically can one adult control at a time? But Page, I think, came at things very differently. When he opened the first of the schools in 2000 in Sweden, and there are now 37 of them in Sweden, 3 in UK, 1 in New York, and now there's going to be the first one in India. Because what he said was, you only need to control the children if you're forcing them to do unnatural things in unnatural ways. If actually, at a particular moment in time, the child is doing what they chose to do, in the way they chose to do it, with whom they chose to do it with, you won't have discipline issues, and you don't need to get so hung up on teacher-student ratio. We will have teachers on a ratio. First year, it'll be a little higher, but once we get established, it'll be 20 to 1. I've visited a number of the schools in Sweden, and you sit with the principal and you say, okay, how do you handle discipline issues? He says, I don't have any. And as well, you know, people have, I think quite rightly, applauded Mirambika for the great work that Mirambika has been doing here in Delhi for a number of years. But who has the courage to take Mirambika's methodologies all the way up to middle and senior school? They say, no, this is nice for junior. But I think that tricks the children. You trick them into somehow believing that learning is fun, and it's about exploring your own creativity and your own curiosity, and then suddenly, slam. Ha, we fooled you. Now we're back to the old system, and everything will look like it did 30 years ago again.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And it was a brilliant session.
Thanks,
Please feel free to catch up with Mark over lunch. We break for lunch now. You showed excellent character coming back from tea on time. Please come back from lunch on time. I'm going to give you 45 minutes. So please be back at 2:15 sharp. Eat less, chew more. Yeah, that's Swedish wisdom. We're going to have a philanthropist from the UK, a person of Indian origin, Vijay Mehta, speaking immediately after lunch. After which we have Swaroop Sampal, the actor and the star from Yejo as a serial, who will speak about her philanthropic work. So please do come back at 2:15. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Thank you.